In the gilded cage of a royal court, death is a constant companion. It lurks in the shadows of political ambition, in the glint of a rival's dagger, and in the whisper of a poisoned cup of wine. The residents of the palace learned to fear the soldier, the spy, and the spurned lover. But they never, ever learned to fear the one man who could walk into any room, past any guard, and stand by the king's own bedside with a needle in his hand. This isn't a story about a clumsy assassin or a vengeful noble. This is the story of a monster who wore the cloak of a savior. A man whose hands were praised for their healing touch, even as they delivered silent, untraceable death. Meet Dr. Alastair Finch, the royal physician. A man so beloved, so trusted, that the kingdom saw him as a gift from God. But here's the secret that was buried for centuries, a truth so horrifying it sounds like a madman's fantasy. Dr. Finch was not a healer. He was a collector. And his collection consisted of the lives of the very people who revered him. You are about to enter a world where the cure was the poison, the doctor was the disease, and the most dangerous place in the kingdom was the infirmary. To understand the genius of his evil, you must first understand the perfection of his disguise. Dr. Finch was a master of performance. He cultivated an aura of gentle, almost saintly, compassion. When a courtier's child was struck by fever, Finch wouldn't just prescribe a remedy. He would sit by the child's bedside for hours, wiping their brow with a cool cloth, his face a mask of profound concern. He spoke in soft, reassuring tones. He would explain complex ailments in simple terms to worried families, making them feel empowered and understood. He was handsome, eloquent, and his reputation preceded him. Nobles from foreign lands would send letters begging for a consultation. The king himself declared that Finch had the hands of an angel. And this, right here, was the foundation of his power. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a beloved institution. He had built up so much trust, so much goodwill, that to question him would be like questioning the sun itself. Who would dare to suggest that the man who soothed the queen's migraines and personally nursed the prince back from the brink of death was anything other than a hero? He wasn't just hiding in plain sight, he was being celebrated, lauded, and showered with riches while he calmly planned his next masterpiece of murder. It began so quietly that no one could possibly have noticed the pattern. The first victim was a minor but wealthy baroness, a woman known for her robust health and booming laugh. She died suddenly in the night, racked with stomach pains so violent that her servants were traumatized. Dr. Finch was there, of course. He worked tirelessly, applying poultices and administering tonics, his face etched with grim determination. When she finally passed, he declared it a tragic, aggressive inflammation of the bowels, a rare but deadly affliction. He sighed with theatrical sadness, accepting the family's tearful gratitude for doing all he could. Months later, it was a visiting diplomat, a man who had been engaged in tense negotiations with the crown. He collapsed after a banquet, his face turning a horrifying shade of blue as he gasped for air. Dr. Finch, ever present, rushed to his side, but pronounced him dead within minutes from a massive heart seizure. A tragedy, he explained, likely brought on by the stress of his duties. A young, ambitious secretary to the Duke. An aging general who was contemplating retirement. A lady-in-waiting who knew too many secrets. One by one, healthy people began to die from sudden, yet medically plausible, illnesses. And the one constant, the one figure of calm authority at the center of every tragedy, was the kingdom's most trusted doctor. You won't find this written in the official court chronicles, but deep within the servants' quarters and the lower ranks of the palace staff, a dark unease began to fester. While the nobles saw only tragic coincidence, the laundresses, stable hands, and kitchen staff saw something else. They were the invisible witnesses to history, and they noticed the details the aristocrats missed. A chambermaid swore that the dying diplomat's breath smelled faintly of bitter almonds. A junior physician's assistant noted in his private, hidden journal that the blue tint on the general's lips was unlike any symptom of heart failure he had ever studied. The laundresses spoke in hushed tones about a strange, crystalline residue they sometimes found on the bedsheets of the deceased, a substance that wouldn't wash out. These were whispers, fragments of a puzzle no one dared to assemble. To voice such a suspicion would be madness. Accusing Dr. Finch? The king's favorite? It would mean instant dismissal at best, and a trip to the dungeons at worst. And so the staff stayed silent, their fear a suffocating blanket that allowed the angel of the court to continue his work uninterrupted, his hands moving from one patient to the next, a silent plague hiding behind a gentle smile. So how did he do it? How did a single man orchestrate a string of perfect murders in the most scrutinized environment on earth? The answer lies in his laboratory, a place the king had funded as a beacon of modern science, but which Finch had turned into his personal arsenal. He was a student of the esoteric, a master of toxicology in an age when the science was barely understood. He never used the same method twice in a row. For the loud-mouthed baron, it was a carefully calibrated dose of aconite, or wolfsbane, slipped into his nightly wine. It induced a catastrophic heart attack, leaving behind almost no trace for the primitive autopsies of the day. For the frail lady-in-waiting, he favored belladonna, or deadly nightshade. It produced a fever, hallucinations, and a flushed appearance before a quiet, respiratory death, symptoms easily mistaken for a severe viral infection. His true genius, however, was his use of slow-acting poisons. He was a connoisseur of arsenic and antimony, compounds he could administer in tiny, cumulative doses over weeks. He would watch with clinical fascination as his victims slowly wasted away, the picture of consumption or cancer. He controlled the narrative completely. He would diagnose the illness, prescribe the cure, which was actually the poison, and then stand by the bedside, offering comfort and false hope, as the patient withered away exactly as he had predicted. But why? Finch had wealth, power, and the king's absolute trust. He had no need for money or political gain. The chilling answer, discovered later in his own private journals, was that he was not a murderer in his own mind. He was an artist, and his medium was life and death. He didn't kill for passion or revenge. He killed for the intellectual thrill of it, for the godlike power of holding a life in his hands and deciding its final chapter. His journal wasn't a confession, it was a portfolio. He wrote not of guilt, but of technique. He would critique his own work, noting, "The belladonna worked flawlessly on Lady Annalise. The flush on her cheeks was remarkably lifelike. A truly convincing performance." About another victim, he wrote, "The arsenic was perhaps too slow. The subject became overly suspicious in the final week. I must refine the dosage for a more elegant conclusion." He saw people not as human beings, but as canvases upon which he could paint a masterpiece of medical deception. He felt contempt for his victims and his colleagues, seeing them as simpletons unable to appreciate his genius. His motivation was the ultimate form of narcissism, the desire to prove he was smarter than God himself, by creating deaths so perfect that even nature would be fooled. Years passed, and the body count grew. Finch became bolder, his arrogance swelling with each successful performance. He began to see himself as untouchable, an immortal artist above the petty concerns of morality. He took risks that would have doomed a lesser man, simply for the thrill of it. There was an incident with a visiting Spanish duke, a man who boasted of having his own physician who was an expert in poisons. Finch saw this as a direct challenge. Over the course of a single week, Finch treated the duke for a minor case of gout, but secretly administered a complex cocktail of toxins designed to mimic a rare neurological disorder. The Spanish doctor was baffled, completely unable to diagnose his master. As the duke's condition worsened, Finch would hold public consultations, intellectually dismantling the other physician's theories with a display of superior knowledge, all while expressing his deep regret that he couldn't save the man. He was not just killing the duke, he was systematically destroying his rival's reputation in the process. He was showing off. This was his fatal flaw, the artist's desperate need for an audience, even if that audience had no idea they were watching a murder unfold. Every artist's magnum opus can lead to their downfall. Finch's came with the birth of the next royal heir. The queen went into a difficult labor, and the entire court held its breath. The king, terrified, put his wife and unborn child's life entirely in Finch's hands. For Finch, this was the ultimate stage. The queen survived the birth, but the infant prince was born weak and sickly. Over the next few days, Finch was the only one allowed to treat him, preparing special tinctures and remedies. But the child only grew weaker. Finch diagnosed a congenital heart defect, a tragic flaw in the royal bloodline that no medicine could fix. He prepared the king and queen for the inevitable, his face a perfect picture of somber empathy. The infant prince died on the 5th day. The kingdom mourned. The king wept on Finch's shoulder, thanking him for his tireless efforts. But Finch had made a mistake. It wasn't medical. It was human. He had failed to account for the one person in the room who wasn't blinded by his reputation. The royal midwife, a woman who had delivered hundreds of babies and trusted her instincts more than any doctor's diagnosis. The midwife, Elara, was a woman of the earth. She had seen death in every form. And what she saw in the royal nursery didn't feel like the work of God, it felt wrong. She had noticed something no one else had. In the final hours of the prince's life, she had caught a faint, almost imperceptible scent on his breath when she leaned in close. The smell of bruised peaches, the telltale sign of crushed cherry laurel leaves, a source of cyanide. Furthermore, she had seen the tiny pinprick marks on the infant's heel, hidden beneath his swaddling clothes, marks that Finch had dismissed as simple skin blemishes. To her, they looked like the marks of a fine needle. She kept her silence, her heart pounding with a terrifying suspicion. She knew the truth was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that to speak it would be to sign her own death warrant. But the image of that dying child, and the doctor's cold, analytical eyes, haunted her. Risking everything, she did something incredibly brave. She managed to snip a tiny piece from the infant's burial shroud, a cloth that had been pressed to his lips. She wrapped it in leather and hid it away, praying she would find someone who would believe her. Elara knew she couldn't go to the king or the royal guard. They revered Finch. She needed an expert, but one who was beyond Finch's influence. She remembered stories of a brilliant old physician, a man named Julian Croft, who had been Finch's main rival years ago. Finch had systematically ruined Croft's career through slander and political maneuvering, leaving him disgraced and practicing in the city's poorest quarters. He was the one man in the kingdom who already hated Alastair Finch. Elara sought him out in secret, presenting him with the stained piece of cloth. Croft, old and bitter but with a mind still sharp as a razor, recognized the faint scent immediately. Working by candlelight in his humble apothecary, he conducted a series of crude but effective chemical tests. The results confirmed Elara's fears. The cloth contained trace amounts of a cyanide-based compound, a poison so potent it could kill an infant with just a few drops. A secret, desperate alliance was formed, the midwife who saw, and the disgraced doctor who knew. They had the proof, but they were powerless. How could two outcasts convince a kingdom that its greatest hero was its most prolific murderer? They needed more. They needed to find his journal. Their plan was desperate. Croft used his few remaining contacts at court to learn about Finch's habits. He knew Finch was pathologically vain and would never let anyone else clean his private study. He also knew that on the night of the full moon, Finch would attend a late-night meeting of the Royal Astronomical Society. That was their window. While Finch was out, Elara, using her knowledge of the palace's servant passages, snuck into the royal physician's sacrosanct study. Her hands shaking, she searched for the one thing that could damn him forever. Behind a false-backed book titled Principles of Natural Healing, she found it, a locked leather-bound journal. She stole it and fled into the night. When Croft opened the journal, he found not just a confession, but a monument to homicidal vanity. Page after page detailed the murders, the methods, the dosages, and Finch's artistic critiques. It was undeniable proof. They took the journal not to the king, but to the one man who had a personal reason to hate Finch, the captain of the guard, whose own father had died 5 years prior under Finch's care. The captain read the entry detailing his father's death, his face turning to stone. The trap was set. Finch was arrested not with a clatter of swords, but with quiet, terrifying politeness. He was invited to the king's private council chamber under a false pretense, and when he entered, he was met not by the king, but by a dozen royal guards. His face, for the first time, showed a flicker of genuine fear. The trial was a mere formality. The journal was his death sentence. The kingdom was thrown into a state of shock and horror. The man they had called a saint was revealed to be a demon in human form. The king, broken by the betrayal and the murder of his own son, delivered a sentence of perfect, poetic cruelty. Dr. Alastair Finch was not to be hanged or beheaded. He was sentenced to be his own final patient. He was locked in a cell, and each day, the royal executioner would bring him a single glass of water containing a tiny, measured drop of one of his own poisons, the contents of the vial changing daily. He was condemned to die by the very artistry he had perfected, his body a canvas for the slow, agonizing masterpiece he had inflicted on so many others. His legacy became a permanent stain on the crown, a terrifying reminder that the most monstrous evil is often the one you invite into your home and trust with your life.